Do you have a dream or goal of where you'd like your life to end up? Do you have a plan that lays out each step on how to get there? What if it doesn't work out the way you thought it would? I'm Catherine Berardi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Chief of Staff Collective podcast. Sometimes our own dreams and our practical plans to get there are the very things holding us back from moving forward. That's one of the many pieces of wisdom that Libby Moore shares with us on today's episode. In fact, this interview was so good that we are splitting it into two parts. Like many of us, Libby Moore's background seems more like a jungle gym than a career ladder. She talks to Prime's Caroline Pugh and describes how her dream of one day working for Rosie O'Donnell ended up a little differently. Here's part one with Libby Moore, Owning Your Dreams.
All right, everybody, we are here today with Libby Moore. Now, Libby is joining us from South Africa because she is a global citizen, and she has done a lot of things. Libby is most known for being the former chief of staff to Oprah, which is why we are chatting today. But before that, in her prior life, she was also working with Maury Povich, as well as Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone magazine, and had a little bit of a career and time working in comedy writing, which we'll go into as well. So Libby, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. Everybody wants to know how you first got started. Where did the inspiration come from in terms of, where your career really ended up? Did you always know that you were going to end up doing what you ended up doing? And, from me knowing you already, the answer to that is no, from my understanding. But maybe we can just backtrack a little bit and start at the beginning and talk about where you first got your inspiration from in working with these specific people, how that journey happened and started, and the revelations along the way.
Well, I always like going way, way, way back to the beginning, because when I'm coaching people now, inevitably in the very first phone call or one of the first couple of calls, they say, what was your first recollection, your very first recollection of what you wanted to be when you were a kid? What did you want to be when you grew up? And for me, my very, very first recollection was I wanted to be an 18-wheeler truck driver. And I think that's because I always had to share a bedroom with my older sister, and then she moved out and got her own room, and then my younger sister moved in. And so sharing a bedroom, I thought, wow, if I had an 18-wheeler truck, I'd have a little king cab with like a bunk bed and a little mini fridge, and I could drive all over the country and meet new people. And so that was very exciting to me. And when my parents would take us on family vacations and we see these big 18-wheelers, as a kid, that was my first recollection. I want to travel, I want to meet new people, and I want my own bedroom. And I thought that would be kind of cool to have a 18-wheeler truck. So even though my mom was horrified by that, that was my very first thing. And then from there, I went on to want to be a cowboy and, then a surfer. And then when I got to high school, I wanted to be in advertising. I was always very creative and imaginative. So I thought advertising would be a good thing for me. And the reason why I touch on all those things is because ultimately I feel as an adult, I'm 62 now, I've really been a version of cowboy, in a very in 2012 when I did the Libby Moore Gypsy Tour, I bought this old Range Rover and wanted to road trip. And I did up and down the West Coast, California, Seattle, LA, Southern California, cross country road trip by myself. So it's kind of like that version, the current version of,
it came around full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the surfer, I started surfing when I was probably 14, 15 with friends of mine from high school. And then I picked it up again when I was, I think when I was 45 and I had left the job with Harpo, and my partner and I moved to Santa Monica, and I picked up surfing again when I was there. So again, in advertising, I've always had collages, which in the 80s we called them collages, on my bedroom wall. And then the 90s, it was vision boards. And then, in 2000s, it's called Pinterest and Instagram. So again, it all, it's following the breadcrumbs. They all kind of come together. And when I went to college, one of my best friends wanted to be a writer for David Letterman, which she was, Jill Davis. And then I thought, I want to be a writer for Saturday Night Live. And I really wanted to perform on Saturday Night Live, but I was too embarrassed to say that. So I just would tell people I want to be a writer. And so that was the early beginnings of what I wanted to be. So to answer your question, no, I had no idea I would be managing someone's life or an executive assistant, a chief of staff. That was so far from my dreams. I failed typing in college. So if that tells you anything, you know, I did not feel that I would be on that track.
Now, the positions that you had with Maury and the next couple positions were a personal assistant and an administrative position. And in our prior conversations, I mean, I can only imagine how hectic that must have been working with those types of individuals in a fast-paced environment, being in the media and entertainment business, and then being a assistant on top of that. And we've talked a little bit about what you found were the things that you were good at and the things that you were not good at during that time. And so maybe we can touch on that a little bit, because I feel like some people have this perception, maybe going into a role saying, you know, I think I would be really good at this role because of X, when the fact is maybe they won't be, or will not, you know, will never be able to, you know, fully dive into that role because they're good at something else. And so I just wanted to touch on that a little bit and see how that journey went for you.
Well, it was interesting because with Maury, I moved to New York eventually at 25 with this dream to be a writer for Saturday Night Live. And a month after I got to New York, through a series of connections, again, why networking is so important, my younger sister's best friend from college, her mother was best friends with a woman that was an associate producer at the Maury Povich show. So other than my good friend from college Jill, who I was staying with when I moved there, this woman was the only other person that I had a name of. I didn't have any contacts in New York. So I took her to lunch and said, oh, if anything opens up at the Maury Povich show, here's my resume. You know, I'll do anything. And she eventually called me in and said, Maury needs a chauffeur, a driver. Would you be interested? So that got me in the door to interview with Maury's personal assistant at the time. And that woman, Erica Goldberg, and I got along really well. We just connected and just had a great connection and a great conversation in that interview. And she said, if we're interested, we'll call you back to come for a test drive. Well, the next day she called me back and said, we'd like you to come in and do a test drive, meaning pick Maury up at home, drive him to the studios, and then take him home. And I said, basically, thanks, but no thanks. I said, I really had time to think about it. I don't think I could give you a year commitment. I think I'd get bored with this. But if something else comes up, please keep me in mind. So again, I share that story to say most people would probably say, oh, no, I'm not interested in being a driver, and just close the door on that opportunity. But at least by being open to the possibility, it got me in the door to meet his personal assistant and other people there.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Again, following the breadcrumbs, it's like, it's all if you just be open to the possibilities. So then Erica got promoted, I think, not even a month later, and called me and said, I just got promoted. Would you be interested in coming in and interviewing to be Maury's personal assistant? And I said, yes. And I went in and interviewed with Maury, and we had a great connection. And again, I want to point that out because I believe whether you're an admin or an executive assistant, personal assistant, chief of staff, to someone, a big part of the success of that working relationship is your chemistry. It's, do you get each other? Do you vibe off of each other in a good way? And Maury and I had a great connection. So I got that job and I stayed with him for 3 years.
Wow.
So again, it's interesting. He's like, do you know anything about golf? Because he's a huge he's an excellent golfer. And other than his work, that's his passion. And I said, no, I don't know anything about golf. He's like, all right, that's fine. And he gave me a shot. I had no experience as an assistant. I'd just come from Boulder, Colorado, where basically, I'd spent 2 years skiing, walking dogs, babysitting, and cleaning houses and doing odd jobs. So my resume was not that fabulous, but I did have a couple years in the Boston area selling radio advertising, newspaper advertising. I worked at Radio Disc. There was other things on my resume, but he really gave me a shot. He gave me a chance, and I respect him so much for that.
Yeah. And then the next steps from there were years later, you were working in Rolling Stone.
Yes. So then eventually after 3 years, I gave Maury a 5-week notice. I said, it's time to move on. And I had been taking comedy classes and all of that, sketch comedy, stand-up comedy, and Gotham City Improv in New York on the side. So I hired someone, I trained them, I replaced myself at Maury. I took another job that just kind of came up out of the blue at USA Live with People's Court and Love Connection as an associate producer. And I tell this story because I was so bad at that job. My job was to type transcripts, and I got fired after 2 months. So I had this successful role with Maury for 3 years. And then I, moved on. And when I took this other job, I got fired after 2 months. And I was really angry when that happened, even though they had every right to fire me because I was not good at the job I was hired to do. And in hindsight, I look back and go, oh, that made such sense because it was the universe saying, no, you don't want to do this. So since you don't have the courage to leave, because I hated that job, I just got fired. So the universe did it for me, so to speak, whether you call it God, universe, something, energy. It just said, okay, honey, you don't need to be here and you're wasting your time. So we're going to fire you so that you can be pointed in another direction. And when I got fired, at that point, I thought, well, I'll just give comedy a try. That's why I moved to New York. And for 2 years, I did these odd jobs and, was in this little sketch comedy group in New York City. And then the job with Rolling Stone came up as Jan Wenner's second assistant. So he had Mary McDonald, who was his assistant for, I think, 25 years at that point, 25 years. And she wanted someone to help her, assist her in his executive office. And I got hired for that job. And I thought, let's do it for a year. And then I stayed for 4 years in that role. And it was great because, again, in that circumstance, I was not the lead assistant as I was with Maury. I was the second assistant, and Mary McDonald O'Brien, her married name, she taught me so much about how to be an excellent manager. She was not a screamer or a yeller. I respected her so much. She was so good at her job. So through modeling what it meant to be, how to be a good manager, that's really who I learned from prior to going to the job with Oprah.
Yeah, so it sounds like the first two major jobs that you had these incredible mentors and just leadership where you could see every single day in and day out, what that example could be and learn so much from that opportunity, which is amazing.
I wanted to make this point because I think it's so important when I work with anybody. It doesn't matter if you're an executive assistant, a chief of staff, or a CEO, or, the EVP of communications. I work with a wide range of people now. And what I find is that some people say, oh, I hate where I am right now, or I don't like where I am right now. And they just think I need to get out of here, which is fine. It's good to know when you don't want to be somewhere. But why I'm making this point is when you look back, every single place has a gift, if not many gifts, many lessons. You are there for a reason to learn something. And with Maury, when I went to Maury, my very first thought was, wait a minute, I'm a creative person. I moved to New York City to write comedy, to perform comedy. I don't know how to be an assistant. I don't want to be an assistant. But it was such a gift for me because many things happened. Number one, which I believe I told your chief of staff networking event in Washington, D.C. I believe I told the story, which was, I knew I was gay my whole life, but thought I will never come out. I grew up in a very small conservative community on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And I didn't have any role models. I really didn't know that was okay or even possible for me in my life. I took the job with Maury when I was 25, and I left when I was 28, I believe, 28 and a half or something. And I came out while working at the Maury Povich show because two reasons. Number one, this would have been, I'm thinking 91, 92, 1992 maybe.
Right.
I think it was 1992 when I came out. I was 27 years old, and Maury, it was the end of the first year that I had worked with him. And the very last show that we did that season was called Coming Out Strong. And it was when Ellen DeGeneres was on the cover of Time magazine, and yep, I'm gay. That was the big cover story. And so he did this show called Coming Out Strong and had 5 gay women, 5 lesbians on the show. And they're all professional, had whatever, families. So just, I could identify with these women. And I'd never seen that before. So I went into his office and I locked the door and I watched the entire in-studio feed from the privacy of his office because I was so afraid that if people saw me watching it out in what we called the bullpen, open office space, that people would think I was gay if I was so into watching the show. That's how terrified I was. So I watched the whole show in his office, and at the end of that show, I just said to myself, yes, I'm gay. I've known this my whole life. It is time for me to come out. And if Maury's doing the show, then that says, that gives me so much hope. It says it's okay. That was number one. And then the other thing, I really want to make a point of saying this. Again, I think it was 1992. And Maury, of course, would be the top person, the head of the show, the top dog. And then the executive producer was an out lesbian. She had a long-term partner. It was a non-issue. Everybody knew. It was no big deal. And then there was another woman who was I believe she was the executive in charge of production, who was also happened to be gay and out, and it was just a non-issue. I had never worked with anybody that was out so freely, and that everybody there, from the host to everyone working there, just didn't care. So to me, the importance of, if you're gay or bi or whatever you are, that you're out, it's not a big deal. Right. So that you can model that for other people. So that, to me, there's so much more that came with that job, working with Maury Povich, who's such an intelligent, kind, generous, wonderful, wonderful man. There were so many gifts working there. So I just wanted to make a point of saying that.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing that story. And I can imagine that you had a conversation eventually with Maury discussing some of what you had been feeling and just thanking him for that opportunity to feel comfortable being who you are. And so how did that conversation come about and how did that go?
That's such a good question. I love that. Thank you for asking that. So that show freed me. I felt so free. I ended up telling my best friend that weekend, look, I think I should be open to seeing women. I felt this way my whole life. She was wonderful, my friend Jill. And then I think it was maybe 2 months later that I met someone and started dating them. And I was so paranoid. I thought everyone at work knew. It was just classic kind of coming out stories. And I thought someone had told Maury. So one day after he came out of the taping, I went into his office and I shut the door and I sat down and said, Maury, I have to talk to you about something. He said, what? And I said, I know you know. And he said, no, what? And I said, I'm sure Jake told you, his best friend. And he said, told me what? And he said that I'm gay. And he just covered his face, like by default, just quickly covered his face. And I said, I just started freaking out saying, oh my God, what? Tell me, are you, what are you thinking? Like, what's happening right now? And he just brought his hands down in his face and he said, oh my God, if I've said anything over the past year that's offended you, I'm so sorry. That was his first thought. And I said, no, not at all. It's actually, I want to thank you because had you not done that show and had you not had these executives here who are out and it's a non-issue, I never would have come out. When I was 20, I almost ended my life because I didn't think I could live a life as an out gay woman, So I said, I want to thank you. This has been so amazing. And he said, have you told your parents yet? And I said, no, I haven't, but I'm kind of doing like a dry run with you right now. And he was so amazing and compassionate.
Wow.
So to me, I had one of the best coming outs, and one of the reasons is because of Maury Povich.
And I can only imagine how much that brought you two together too in that moment.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He was just an extraordinary person. He and his wife, Connie Chung, I mean, they treated me as if I was one of their daughters. I couldn't have asked for a better entree into the whole New York City scene.
Okay, so going back to finding the opportunity with Oprah.
Yes.
And this kind of came in multiple stages through a series of really interesting events and in a lot of ways, fate. So maybe we can just walk through a bit of that timeline and then that moment when you had first initially met her.
So at this point, I was working with, as the second assistant to Jan Wenner, Rolling Stone. And about 3 years into that, because I was with him for 4 years. And at 3 years in, I really thought, what? I do not like being an assistant. This is not for me. This is not my strong suit. I kind of was that person that would forget phone calls and hidden filing, even though that was part of my job. So, and I know there's people listening going, yeah, that's me. But what I loved was when guests would come and I'd have to go to the front and bring them from reception and walk them back down to Jan's office and making people feel really comfortable or giving them a tour of the offices. Those are the kind of things that I loved. Or how could I make Jan's life better? What could I take off Mary's plate to make her life better? Things like that. So about 3 years in, I really thought it's time to move on. I've been in New York for, I think it was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 7 years, 7.5 years at that point. And I actually had Jan's partner got me an interview with the head writer of Saturday Night Live. So I went in, I had this informational interview, and I walked out knowing that I would not be a writer there. It was very, in the 90s, early 90s, it was very kind of white, male-dominated culture of writers, and they all went to Ivy League schools, and they had a ton of writing experience, and none of that was me. And I just thought, I'm clearly not going to be writing here. So then I set my sights on the Rosie O'Donnell show, because at the time, she had one of the top talk shows next to Oprah. She was gay, she respected kids and older people, and she was very funny, and it was just a fun, lighthearted show. And I thought, I'm going to be a writer for Rosie O'Donnell. So I started networking, and I would be out at a party or coffee or whatever, and people say classically, where do you work? I work at Rolling Stone. Oh, that's so cool. Yes, but I'm going to be writing for Rosie O'Donnell in a year. Do you know anybody that works there? So I was really like pushing this whole networking thing with Rosie. And even though some possibilities would come up, they never panned out. And I mean, I was like praying about it and journaling about it and networking like crazy. I'm really pushing it. I had a laser focus on, I am going to be a comedy writer for the Rosie O'Donnell show. And by the way, I would send a FedEx from Rolling Stone to the Rosie O'Donnell show, which by the way was 1 block away, with my writing submissions every month to the head writer with, monologues and sketches and stuff like this. No one ever responded, ever. So at one point, which I think is very interesting, 6 months before I got the job with Oprah, I think it was about 6 months, my mom said, Elizabeth, why don't you send your resume to Oprah? Because you love her magazine just came out, you love her magazine, you love her show, you've always loved her. Why don't you send your resume there? And I said, Mom, first of all, whoever is Oprah's assistant, why would they leave that job? Number one. And number two, I love New York City. My girlfriend's here. My life is here. I don't want to move to Chicago. And I just shut it down. You and I have talked about this before. It's, to me, in hindsight, that was the universe speaking through my mother, using my mother almost as like a channel or a vessel to give me that hint. Hey, send your resume to Oprah because something just opened up there. I mean, that's truly what had happened. But I blew it off. I closed the door on that and I shut her out. And I never sent that resume. I just thought, what do you know? So sending all the submissions. I'm still working at Rolling Stone. And probably in September, late September, I was riding the subway to Rolling Stone one day, and I just said this prayer. I set this intention. I said, okay, universe, God, clearly you do not want me to have this role with Rosie because you know how badly I want it. So whatever it is I'm supposed to do, every atom, cell, and molecule in my body, mind, soul, and spirit is open to it. Show me what it is, shine a big fat spotlight on it. So I'm very clear that's what I'm supposed to do, and I will do it. And I just release that intention out to the universe, meaning I really let go of trying to force what I thought was the best thing for me. That would mean releasing Saturday Night Live totally, right. Releasing the Rosie O'Donnell show, and I just released it. And then I think it was maybe 4 weeks later that this email came into me through a networking group called NYCA, New York Celebrity Assistants, meaning assistants to very high-profile people in New York. I think there were about 100 people in the group. And this woman, Trish Peters, who was Brian Gumbel's assistant at the time, sent the email to this whole group of 100 assistants and said, I was just contacted by an executive headhunter in Chicago. They're in search of chief of staff, executive assistant to a high-profile person in Chicago. Responsibilities include, and it had this long list of things. And the very first two things said, one was coordinate private plane aviation team, pilots. And the second thing was coordinate hair and makeup team. And I stopped right there and thought, oh my God, this is Oprah Winfrey because hair and makeup means on TV. And it's in Chicago, which means Jenny Jones and Jerry Springer cannot afford a private plane. Right. This is Oprah. Wow. And I swear to you, Caroline, I knew in that moment that this is the job meant for me, and that is why I did not get the Saturday Night Live or the Rosie thing. And sure enough, I sent my resume. That was Friday the 13th, October the 13th, 2000. On a Friday, I sent my resume on Monday. I updated it over the weekend, and the headhunter called me that day.
That is an amazing story. I just wanted to go through the motions of being such an open person as you are, because the way in which that you describe the series of events, you describe it in the way that you described the universe was showing me through my mother, and then it led to this and it led to that. I wouldn't characterize you as a spiritual person from a religious standpoint. And that's what you even said in the DC event. But I think the big takeaway and the buzz from the audience after the event was, wow, the way in which that Libby described seeing opportunities and seeing things for what they are really opened my eyes to how I can see things for myself, whether it's in my professional life or my personal life. And I will say, Libby, I mean, in the last couple months that I've known you, I feel like I've really been able to tune into that just from little minuscule things and the differences of me just taking opportunities for what they are and trying to see the signs of what the universe is trying to tell me. If you talk to anybody else, that sounds very spiritual and that sounds like something a yogi would say. And this is a testament to who you are, which is, right before we started this podcast, I said, are you ready? And you said, you know what, let me take 30 seconds to meditate, which I think is so important, especially for any chief of staff or anybody who's listening to this type of podcast, in incorporating that type of mindset to think and pause and to open your eyes into what's right in front of you. And so how do you feel like, because now you're doing executive coaching and now you're specifically helping people maybe see through these opportunities. How do you frame that to someone else who is living this kind of crazy life now?
I love that you're making a point of this. I love this so much, because to me, this is the point of everything, everything in life. I would say when I was in the job, I remember when I got the job and I gave Jan, I think, a 4-week notice. I've been very good about giving long notices.
Yeah.
So I gave a 4-week notice, got everything lined up before I left. And I remember the last day, right before I left Rolling Stone, and then, it was right around December 4th, 2000 was my first day at the Oprah Winfrey show in Chicago. So I remember this woman came in, someone who worked at Rolling Stone. She said, Libby, when things get really busy and hectic and tough, just breathe. Just take a deep breath and a slow exhale. And in my mind, I went, oh, okay, yeah, thanks. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, right. I mean, I remember that so clearly.
Right.
And if you're not in tune with that, it just sounds like a bunch of crap. Like, oh, yeah, just breathe, And that's how I took it at that time. Like, oh, yeah, thanks. And inside I'm thinking, okay, what else? And what I realize now in hindsight is she was 1,000% right. 1,000%. And I have some examples of that when I was working with Oprah and how that came into play. So, and now, of course, I left, it'll be 7 years ago, January 1st, 2019, since I left Harpo. I realized that is the most important thing that anybody can do. I don't care if you're a chief of staff or an assistant or a partner to someone that's listening to this podcast and you run Exxon. It doesn't matter. The deep breath and the slow exhale is everything. Because number one, do you mind if I talk about this just for
Oh, yes, please.
Smidge? Yeah. The reason why that's so important is because, in particular, in a very stressful situation, your brain basically is gone. When you have that, like, holy cow, I'm freaking out right now. I don't even know what to do. Whether you have so much on your plate or someone's yelling at you or whatever the case may be. Your brain just, boom, okay, she's anxious, release the cortisol. So the brain is releasing the chemical cortisol, which causes more anxiety in you. And you just kind of freeze up. But when you are aware that you're like, I feel anxious or stressed, the awareness is important, because then you can say, I need to take a deep breath and slow exhale. So when you take that deep breath and slow exhale, the body is telling the brain, hey, everything's okay down here. So basically the brain turns off the release of cortisol and you immediately feel better. And I suggest that people take 3 deep breaths and slow exhales. This is not new information. People have been writing about it and talking about it since the beginning of time. And there's a power in the number 3. So you take 3 deep breaths and slow exhales. And by the time you've finished your 3rd exhale, not only have you just created maybe seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, between that deep breath and slow exhale is the bridge between chaos and calm. It's the bridge between fogginess and clarity. Those deep breaths and slow exhales is bringing oxygen into your brain, and boom, you're in alignment with your higher self, higher intelligence, God, source, universe, energy, whatever you want to call it. That deep breath and slow exhale is essentially a portal into an electromagnetic field of limitless ideas, solutions, creativity. You could go on and on and on.
Right.
That is everything. I mean, I'm trying to break it down in a super Fisher-Price, simple, for the sake of time. That deep breath and slow exhale is the most valuable thing that we have, period.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great way that you describe that, because I think a lot of people have this thing where they feel like it's going to take all this work and time and energy to get to that place. And they envy the friends that have the time to go to yoga every day, have the time to do an hour of meditation. They're like, I just can't do that. But the way that you describe how just the breath and taking that deep breath can make a lot of the difference, and that is an amazing starting point. I think it makes it just so much easier for people to realize how big that can be. Okay, so you saw the opportunity in the posting with Oprah, and talk about the first conversation. I mean, I'm guessing you had that phone call with someone at their office, and they liked what you had to say, and then they set up the meeting.
Yes, so basically that first call was with a wonderful, incredible woman named Helen Fronteras from Chicago, who worked with an executive recruiting firm there. She passed away several years ago, and I'm so grateful to her because she called me. We had an initial phone call, and she said, wow, you sound like an interesting candidate. Let's have a proper phone interview tomorrow. So the next day she called. We did a 45-minute to an hour phone interview. And she saw something in me and passed my name on to, of course, the president. She said, I'd like you to speak with the president of Harpo and the director of human resources on Friday. So then a couple of days later, I had a conference call with Tim Bennett and Bernice Smith. And, that day, Jan was in the office. And I said prior to that day, I said to my supervisor, Mary McDonald, I said, Mary, I know I might be shooting myself in the foot because I don't know that I'm going to get this job, but I just want to be honest with you. I've had 2 phone calls with this recruiter, and I'm speaking with the president of Harpo and the director of HR on Friday to interview to be potentially Oprah's chief of staff executive assistant. And I might not even get it, but I want to be honest with you. And she said, oh my God, that's amazing. If you get it, you must take it. What an opportunity. And if you do get it, I would be so sad to see you go, but I would obviously want you to take this job. So she was very cool about it. The call came in. I dressed as I mentioned at your event, I dressed in a suit, because I believe that energy, everything, how you're dressed, everything carries through in your energy. So even though it was a phone interview, I dressed as if I was walking into their office that day. The phone came in. I ran down to the storage room. I had my resume, my list of questions, my list of accomplishments all lined up on these boxes. I sat on a little steps ladder in there, and I had this 45-minute call with Tim and Bernice. And it went very well. And they said, Oprah's going to be in New York next week. Can you meet her next Friday? And I said, yes. And, so that the first thing I went to Bloomingdale's, I think, and got a new DKNY suit and new shoes. And, I didn't tell a lot of people about it. I told my girlfriend and my mom and, a couple other friends. And my mom, God bless her, she had said at one point, I feel this is an important story to tell. And she's wildly supportive of me now. I mean, she's incredible. This is many years ago. But at the time she said, Elizabeth, when, if Oprah asks about your personal life, I don't think you should tell her that you're gay. And I said, Mom, I completely understand why you're saying that, because you want me to get this job. And I want this job too. But if Oprah is not comfortable having a gay person as her chief of staff, then I am not the right person for this job. So I'm not going to hide who I am. And she said, yeah, that's a really good point. And by the way, I want to clarify, my mom is so, now she's always been so supportive of me and my partners and things like that. That day, I went to this really nice hotel where the interview was. I got there early. I sat in the corner in the lobby and just, closed my eyes and did deep breaths, slow exhales.
Now, it had hit you that you were meeting with Oprah, or did you just treat this? Did you try to ignore the fact that this was who you're meeting with, and you were like, this is just another meeting?
That's such a good question. Of course, I was out of my mind excited. I could not believe it. I grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, so I remember watching Oprah on People Are Talking on WJZ-TV out of Baltimore.
Right.
I mean, I remember her on that show. And then when I was in college, I remember, coming home from class so that I could watch the Oprah Winfrey show in 1986, I think it was. So I had grown up with her, really. So I couldn't believe that I was getting to interview with her, and I resonated with her, as we all do, right? I mean, she's so funny and open and vulnerable and compassionate. So I was just thrilled. And so during this preparation, before going into the restaurant where I was going to meet Oprah and Tim, I said this little prayer, this intention, and I said, okay, thank you for bringing me here. This is amazing. In my mind, I'm saying, I cannot believe I'm about to meet Oprah. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Please flow through my body, mind, soul, and spirit. And again, I'm deep breathing, slow exhale, and help me. If I am meant for this job, please make it very clear to her and to me. Make it clear to both of us. And if this is not the right position for me, then thank you for this incredible opportunity that I get to meet Oprah Winfrey. So again, one, it was getting into a very grounded place, meaning and I also remember saying, thank you for flowing through me and helping me to feel calm, cool, and confident. Right. So again, some people listening would call that a prayer, and some people would call that, oh, she was just using affirmations. And my whole thing is, it does not matter what you call it. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. And we're arguing over what to call it and killing each other in some cases over what to call this, whether it's God, universe, energy. And the truth, what I found, what I'm very clear on, is it's all the same thing. Yeah. We're just arguing over the label of it, but it's the same thing.
And so, as a part of that preparation process, I feel like, because some people were asking me this too, which is, before you go into any big meeting, whether it's a big interview, big client meeting, whatever it is, I feel like people go through the stages of really writing down, what is the first thing I'm going to say? What if this person asked me this question? How am I going to answer that? How deliberate were you in thinking through the potential scenarios in which this conversation would take place with Oprah? Because I feel like you are such a whatever happens type of person, and you trust the universe and you have this trust in yourself. But some people may take a much more calculated approach. What was your thinking through that? Because obviously this is such a huge moment. This is what you've been waiting for. You're so excited. Did you have that moment where maybe even 5 minutes before you were just standing in the mirror talking through, this is how I'm going to introduce myself, and, going through the motions of all of that stuff?
Wow, such a great question. My prep is the prep that I did prior to this call, for example. Normally I don't want to know the questions ahead of time. To anything, whether it's a conference Q&A, I like just speaking from my heart organically. That's where I have found that I've done best. So also when I try to prep, I found that in the past when I've tried to prep for something, it's, for me, I can only speak for myself. And I believe if a lot more people try this, they will agree. If you're open and you're speaking from your heart and you're speaking truthfully, then that is the most authentic place that you can come from. So there was no prep. I didn't look in the mirror and practice, I'm going to say this or that. That was my prep, that prayer, that intention, those thoughts that I had prior to going into the dining room, was thank you. So I was saying that to this greater intelligence that might be my higher intelligence. All I know is that I align with that higher intelligence, the highest intelligence in the universe, whatever that is. And I say, thank you for this opportunity. 1, gratitude. And 2, thank you for flowing through me. So I imagine this energy, because we all are energy. of like, bring me into the highest potential of who I am. It was very organic. And it was almost like, I grew up as an Episcopalian, and then over the years, I've just been exposed to so many different and fascinating religions and atheists and agnostics, so many wonderful conversations with all kinds of people, that anyone to say I'm a Christian is so limiting to me, or to say, I mean, my God, I'm not even a Democrat or a Republican. I've always been an independent. So that's more my vibe. I'm very open. And so for me, the prep was getting in alignment with my higher self, who I truly am through and through, mistakes, flaws, and everything. Just help me to walk in there and be 100% myself. That was truly my intention. And I believe that that's what she responded to. That's what she picked up on. So it wasn't about like studying anything ahead of time.
Right. It
was purely like getting in the zone. And what is the zone? Being in alignment with your highest self. Right. And by the way, we're human beings. I mean, I'm constantly like, I'm so frustrated. I'm out of alignment. Getting back in alignment. This is what I've learned over the years.
So let's go through that initial meeting.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. I say this intention, make it clear to both of us if I'm meant to have this role. And if not, then thank you for this great opportunity, because the energy of gratitude and appreciation is so important. Yeah. So important. So I went to sit down. The host said, you're the first one here. I sat at the table they had reserved. Mm-hmm. Then Tim Bennett walked in, who was the president of Harpo at the time, such a lovely man. And he introduced himself. He said, Oprah's on the phone with President Clinton. She'll be right down. And I said, oh, okay. My poker face was like, oh, okay. And inside, oh my God.
I know.
Oprah Winfrey is on the phone with President Clinton, and she's coming to meet me for an interview. Little Libby Moore from Berlin, Maryland, who was on academic probation at times and failed typing in college. It was just all these things kind of racing through my mind. And then she walked in, and the whole crowd, it was Friday at like 4 p.m. or 5. And I just heard, oh, there's Oprah. And she walked in, and just her lovely, gracious self, as she always is, and came over and shook my hand and sat down. And I remember we spoke for 40 minutes, the three of us. Because when you meet with Oprah Winfrey, you remember things like that. You remember the details. I remember she was just very comfortable, and we were all chatting. And at some point at 30 minutes after the hour, when we started, she said, well, what's your plan? And I said, what do you mean, what's my plan? She said, no, your plan for your life. And in that moment, Caroline, I had this nanosecond in my head. I thought, oh my God, do I tell her what I think I should say in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, what I think she wants to hear, or do I tell her the truth? And I went with the truth. And I said, well, the truth is, 5 weeks ago, I was thinking I was going to be a writer for the Rosie O'Donnell show. I mean, I've been sending writing submissions to the head writer for the past 2 months, and nothing's happened. So finally, I just said this prayer, this intention on the subway to work one day. Okay, clearly you don't want me to write for Rosie. So whatever it is, every atom, cell, and molecule of my body, mind, soul, and spirit is open to it. Show me what it is, be clear, and I'll do it. And I just released it. And then about 4 weeks later, this opportunity with you came through the recruiter. And so, here I am sitting with you having a glass of Chardonnay. So if you leave this meeting and you feel like I'm the right one for the job, then I would be honored to take it, because it matches my 7 years of experience as an executive assistant with what I'm passionate about. And what I'm passionate about is what you're doing on your show, in your magazine, in your foundation, helping women and girls throughout the world. And so that would be an amazing thing. I would be honored to take the job. But if you leave this interview and you feel like, oh, she's nice, but I don't think she's the right one for the job, that's okay too, because that means there's a better, more appropriate fit for a chief of staff for you, and they're coming like right around the corner. And if this isn't what the universe has planned for me, I can't wait to see what's next.
Wow.
And we just stared at each other for a nanosecond. And then she looked at Tim and said, okay, let's bring her to Chicago. And then Tim was like, whoa, let's slow this train down a little bit. Why don't we have Libby in Chicago and meet our folks? And
right.
She's like, okay, yeah, let's do it then. We got up and she gave me a big hug and said, see you in Chicago. And that was it. And then they left. They had to fly back to Chicago because she had, I think, shows the next day or something. And I remember leaving this very nice hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And I lived way down in the West Village. And it was October. And it was a beautiful night. And I walked down Fifth Avenue. And I thought to myself, I've got that job. Like, I knew it. We looked into each other's eyes. And there was something like, oh, I see you. I see you. There was a connection made. Of course, they didn't offer me a job that day. I went to Chicago and interviewed and all that kind of stuff. Tons of people there. But walking home that night, I thought, I got that job. It was very clear to me as I asked on the subway, remember that prayer, that intention, like, show me what it is and be clear. And I walked home and I walked past 30 Rockefeller Center, which is where Saturday Night Live is. And I believe the Rosie O'Donnell show was taping out of there as well. And I looked up and I thought, oh my God, I thought it was you guys that I came to New York for, but it's Oprah. My dream was Saturday Night Live and Rosie, but I had to let go of my dream to allow an even bigger dream to play. So I was so hyper-focused on, oh no, I'm going to do this and this. But once it wasn't working and I felt like I kept hitting the wall, once I released it, something even better came in. Yeah. And I ended up, getting the job and staying for 11 years. And it changed my entire life for the better. I couldn't have dreamed something bigger.